a third
Yeah.
person joining us, but we're having some tech issues. But we're starting in hopes that she'll be able to hop on.
Yeah, and so our scheduled guest, I guess the right way of putting it at this point, LIsa McKee is in West Virginia, and so obviously we're not close to her. We can't help her get on, and our roving band of producers uh, walked off the job yesterday, protesting work conditions.
Yeah.
So they can't help her either.
I figure they should have to provide their own masks. I don't understand why they expect us to do it.
I know. Anyway, we've been really looking forward to having Lisa on. Hopefully, she will be able to get into the broadcast. But really, the reason that I had invited her, Lisa's been a friend and a colleague of mine for several years. She's a Methodist minister, and let's see, in West Virginia, as I said, and she is a member of and an advocate for the disability community. Um, Hopefully, if she gets in here, she'll be able to introduce herself more and explain that more. But I was talking with her last week, and she was saying some really interesting things about the perspective. Obviously, folks within her community have been having a lot of conversation about this for a whole host of reasons. You know, many of them are in the high risk category. Obviously, they've got attendants who are coming into their house who may or may not be exposed. It's a very, very challenging situation for people in their situation in life. And but one of the things she was talking about was how their perspective, particularly on this whole shelter in place and the very rapid deployment of technology for all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so first of all, very interesting seeing, able-bodied people suddenly starting to say things like, wow, my world has gotten really small and it's a bummer that I can't get out and do whatever I want.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, this is something that, the disability community has been pointing out and talking about for a long, long time. I mean, that's many of these folks, that's been their entire life.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we just want to spend a little time kind of talking about these different kinds of perspectives. And, I also am just aware that there's been more and more information coming out about how disproportionately this pandemic is affecting communities of color in terms of percentages of incidence rates, percentages of death rates, all those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and to me, this is something that I think is obvious to a lot of people, but maybe not obvious to mainstream people, is the way in which our society is built to prioritize some people over others. But the sense I'm getting is all that is becoming so intensified that it's easier for mainstream people to notice.
Yeah.
Like the dominant culture is like, okay, certain people die quicker than others. I don't think it's because they're more prone to being killed by coronavirus necessarily. There's some of that, we talk about that, but like these other numbers are like, no, it's different communities that aren't somehow more susceptible to dying by the virus are dying by the virus more. Why is that?
Right. Yeah. Hi, Faith. Thanks for logging on and saying hello. Right, exactly. So, one of the most poignant photographs I've seen in this regard I saw yesterday was a picture of the L train in Chicago, one of the lines. Mm-hmm. And so here's this train car completely packed with people, obviously no ability for social distancing in this train car. and it's all black and brown people in this car, right? And a few of them have masks, some really flimsy, but again, they're just packed together during rush hour. And these are people that are having to go out and work, and they're having to take the train back and forth to work, and obviously they are in an incredibly high risk situation, and don't really have any option. And this is, of course, the nature of structural racism, structural ableism, and we're seeing that play out, as you said, very clearly right now.
Mm-hmm. And then, of course, when you start reflecting upon our society and how it relates to people with disabilities, there is the idea of who gets to access what. Like, so yesterday, was it yesterday that there was the election in Wisconsin?
Yep.
Space-time gets blurry during this pandemic. Like,
Yep.
who's able to access polling, or to their voting? Who's able to access different kinds of care, groceries,
Yep.
all these sorts of things. And then, it gets complicated. Like, I entirely support Instacart and Amazon workers, but now I can't remember the name. Shipped, I think, is the people who handle stuff for Target. They're considering striking.
Yep.
And so those are services that people who are not able to leave their homes easily rely upon. And it shows just the complexity. When things break down, you see who it privileges and who it doesn't.
Yep. Yep. Hey, Scott and Kathleen. And Wisconsin was voting. And then the other great comment and thing that Lisa pointed out to me was this whole issue of technology, right? So she's on a number of national church boards with the Methodist Church. She's on a number of church boards within her district. That's how the Methodists organize in districts. Mm-hmm. And for years, she and other people in the disability community have been advocating for online access to meetings, right? So that they don't have to, have an attendant, load them in a van, drive them to this face-to-face meeting. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly expensive. Some of the meetings, as I said, if you're on a national board, you've got to get on a plane, you've got to fly somewhere. And what she has heard for years from these folks is, we have to meet in person. That's so special. That's really important. That's the way the church does business. And basically, all of this plea for online access to things has been rebuffed. Mm-hmm. And now, suddenly, when it's the privileged folks that are being threatened, suddenly it's okay to have all these meetings online, right? And overnight, the church is like, of course we're going to meet online. Let's go to Zoom. Let's do this. And that's just a very, very painful thing to see and experience, because it makes it very clear that the dominant system and culture does not really care about you. And never really took you or your concerns or your perspective on life, your reality, seriously at all. Mm-hmm. And that's just, really, and again, the privileged folks are all going, yay, wow, this is so great that we can do this. But the people who are oppressed by the system, they're not wanting to celebrate, because it's just a very painful demonstration of how little folks, how little their lives mean. Mm-hmm. Hey, Karen, welcome from California. Good to see you.
And Kathleen brings up that Wisconsin Republicans also limited the number of voting places in areas that are concentrations of people of color.
Yeah.
And so it's the system privileges who it wants to privilege. And, this is part of the complexity, is if there's systemic weight behind privileging certain people, individual, like white culture people or people who are able-bodied people, like it's hard to know, like there's not enough systemic support to really even be able, like it's structural, systemic wide. It's not that, it doesn't matter what the individual content of someone's heart is if the system is arrayed against different people.
Right. Now, yeah, throw that comment up by Maria. This is a really important issue.
Maria writes, when I posted a meme with the COVID-19 death statistics in Chicago, I had a friend respond that the reason it might be is because of a different biological susceptibility. Biology is one of the oldest racial tropes.
Yes, exactly. And it's amazing how deeply embedded that is, even within the medical world. Yeah, this notion that, somehow Black folks have higher rates of diabetes or heart disease or blood pressure problems because the biology of Black people is different, which is absolute nonsense. I mean, there's not one shred of evidence for this. And what is different is, 400 years of trauma and structural racism and stress and poverty. And so, so then when you take that and lay it on top of a pandemic where you're in a subway car with 200 other people, some of whom are probably spreading the virus, you are a body that has all these comorbidities that we know create this far higher death rate.
Mm-hmm.
And so, this has nothing to do with biology. This has everything to do with this system of structural racism.
Oh, it looks like Lisa's succeeded.
Oh, Lisa's made it.
So I'm gonna bring her up on now.
Woohoo!
Yay. Woohoo!
Hey, Lisa.
Hi, guys.
Hey, you did it.
Awesome. I'm glad you're able to make it.
Never again will I regret having multiple devices in the house. Yeah. So, actually, anyway, hi.
We did our best to try to get the conversation started, but we're grateful you're here now.
Yeah. So Lisa, this is my friend Mark. Mark, this is Lisa, and Lisa, maybe you could introduce yourself a bit and just say a little bit, kind of kick us off with a bit about some of your thoughts and perspectives on what we're facing with the pandemic.
Well, my name is LIsa McKee, and I'm a United Methodist elder in the West Virginia Annual Conference. I've lived with cerebral palsy for over 50 years. And my thoughts aren't original to me. It's just like people I've been in contact with, Twitter feeds I follow, newscasts about disparities, those kind of things. But a lot of what I'm seeing is lack of access to resources. Like for me, for myself, Chucks, adult diapers, a baby wipe is not to be found in my area. I know some of my friends have stocked up on catheters and those kind of things in terms of supplies. But a lot of the different conversations I've been kind of following, I've been discussing eugenics and lack of access and isolation.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And lack of access, like it's a new thing. And I was and I was thinking this morning that the ADA is almost 30 years old. The Americans with Disabilities Act is almost 30 years old. And we're still at the very stages of getting what we need. I had a conversation with my dentist's office, and I said, I got a new chair and it should help us, but I don't know if your doorways are wide enough to let it in.
Right.
And it just, that I was having that kind of conversation 30 years down the road is just strange to me and upsetting. The conversation about like who gets treatment first and how human lives are put on a paradigm or a continuum rather. Somebody said to me yesterday, we're already being pushed down, and now we're going to be pushed down further.
Right. Yeah.
And people are talking about this isolation thing as if it's new, and like we've been struggling for all of our lives to not be isolated. So there's some thoughts to get the conversation started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, very, very challenging. Very challenging. Right. I mean, and I wonder if you'd say something about the whole issue of, just this experience, right? I mean, you rely regularly on other people to help you, right? And so now this whole question of, these folks coming and going from your house, and now on top of everything, you have to be worried about, are they, observing proper precautions to keep themselves well? That's got to be really, really difficult.
Well, fortunately for better for worse, I'm the kind of person who likes my assistants in that manner to become kind of like family. And so, like, usually there's only one person. We hire one person and then they leave, and then we hire another person. But at this point, my assistant is recovering addict, and she's living at home with her mother who's fragile, and she hasn't been here all week. Luckily, folks, I have clothes on, but she hasn't been here all week because her mother's been sick. We don't think it's the coronavirus, just a bursiodome and vertigo, but still, her mother. Yeah, it's hard. How do you? Unfortunately, her mother has recovered from cancer and has had a lung condition, so she's really careful about disinfecting things and being clean and taking precautions. But when people are dependent on other people, it's just hard. And I heard another newscast this morning, and I'm dismayed and amazed that we're not addressing these things historically. We're questioning why, kind of off topic here, but we're questioning why African Americans and people of color are getting hit disproportionately when they hold the frontline jobs,
Right.
like bus drivers and servers and whatever. And I'm like, that's in our history forever.
Right.
We
Yeah.
killed the Indians. Yeah.
Yeah, no, we were just talking about that actually while you were working to get on. And yeah, Mark, maybe you could, we've got a couple of comments and question for you, Lisa.
James comments that he's really moved by the statement, people are talking about this isolation as being something new when some of us have been experiencing this our whole lives. And then Kathleen asks, Lisa, can you give us any tips on how to deal with isolation?
Well, I'm just trying to like keep moving. It's an odd thing, but keep moving. At least do one thing a day to keep moving something forward. And then other days, just eat cheese popcorn continuously. Um, I think we're all in a place of the unknown. We have to like just be aware of that. Like today, I will probably, when I leave here, just play John Prine music all day. Just, yeah, just because it was my kind of thing. So, just honor where you are and be aware of that.
Right. Yeah, I like that. I like that notion of, you know, each day just trying to move one thing a little forward. You know, that sounds very gentle and nice. Mark, it kind of reminds me of, so Lisa, last Friday we talked with a friend of ours about the issue of parenting and in the pandemic, and she had this great phrase about her goal was to be consistently adequate. You know, which just sounds very compassionate and kind to herself, and you know, your phrase reminds me of that. It's another kind of kind, compassionate thing. Like, just move one thing a little forward, and right, and then eat popcorn the rest of the time.
That's right.
And like maybe I was talking to another mentor yesterday, someone that I've had to stay connected with through my career, and just really saying that I'm hungry for something different. Like I don't want to go back to business as usual.
Yeah.
I really am prayerful that something new and bold and inventive will come out of this. Where we honor everybody.
Yeah. Mary Jane Fay writes, honor where you are. I love that. Thank you.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that, you know, that has been a theme throughout what Mark and I have been talking about on this broadcast. You know, is this idea of the pandemic as this unveiling that does create the possibility of new things. And of course, there'll be a lot of pressure to go back to the way things were, but I do think there are many of us that are saying, wow, you know, this is really a chance, especially as we see all these kinds of inequities and injustices, and it just makes it very clear that maybe we can use this as an opportunity to create some new structures and possibilities.
Like even the idea of, you and I talked the other day, Dan, about even the idea of like meeting virtually.
Right. Yep.
Like people with disabilities have wanted virtual classrooms for 30 plus years, and we have been told, it's not possible.
Right.
and and so now everyone is doing it. And
Mm-hmm.
so we're discovering, either by economic need or whatever, that nobody needs to be alone in their houses
Right.
or uneducated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I've often thought about that. Like, if nothing else, after the pandemic, there'll be all kinds of things where people will want to go back to certain things and say, "Oh, that's impossible," or "We can't do that," and we'll at least be able to say, "Well, I know that's not true because during the pandemic, we all did that," right? Right. Like, if nothing else, it could be an object lesson.
um, yeah, yeah. Um, let me just bring, well, I don't know how this is connected, but somewhere I think it is. But I just wanted to bring up a couple of days ago, like, my husband and I were watching the polio epidemic on PBS. And the next day, the Google Doodle was about the Australian doctor who studied polio vaccine. And in the mirror were a disabled little girl and a disabled woman. And the reflection back in the mirror was a healed little girl and a healed woman. And it took me back to one of the earlier polio pandemic posters of a healthy little girl. And under her picture was this. So it had the word this. And on the other panel, it was a picture of a little girl on crutches crossed out. And the caption underneath was not this.
Mm.
And I'm like, whoa. So in the midst of this pandemic, we're discussing another a past pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
And we're having ableism on top of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we're really, that speaks to the value of, or the unvaluing of, certain types of life. Or
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, and it's just, and again, I'm really curious. For those of us who've been noticing things like this, it seems extra obvious now how our society privileges certain people and treats others as expendable, pretty much. But I'm wondering, like, this is one of those things where I'm like, maybe I should go listen to those news sources that raise my blood pressure to see how much, if they're noticing it, because I want to be realistic about, I think there are people who are able to recognize something that maybe has been obvious to others, but I don't want to be too optimistic that somehow there can be a shift that just naturally happens. To me, it shows us the work that needs to be done, and how do we use this moment as a way of helping people see reality better or perceive it better so that they can challenge these injustices.
Okay. The news broadcast that I saw this morning, without mentioning any names, is the broadcast that typically takes me to my happy place. And I was amazed that other than the Surgeon General, they had videoed in a doctor of color who was talking about testing and lack of testing, and how we are not tested for what was the word she used, for health reasons. We put the testing areas in privileged spots.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not quoting her exactly, but it's like, and they're acting like this is disconnected from everything that we've done in the past, and it's just repetition of whose voices we value, whose voices we invite to the table, and rather than inviting everyone to the table and making everyone, assuming that everyone is equal stakeholders, we listen to money and economics first,
Yeah.
rather than life value.
Yeah, and just to jump on from a technical point of view here, while we have reached our 30-minute time slot, is it okay with the two of you if we go for a little longer, because it took Lisa a while to get on?
Yeah.
We can go for a few more minutes. And, Mark, maybe you could throw up that comment from Kathleen, which she says was actually Scott's comment, which relates directly, Lisa, to what you just said.
Scott, via Kathleen's Facebook account, writes, as long as Citizens United is law, the possibility of needed change will only occur through radical revolution.
Right. And so for those of you who are not aware, Citizens United was the Supreme Court decision that said that corporations were people for the purpose of contributing to elections. And so, that has created this vast flood of money into our electoral process, obviously for candidates who are then supporting these corporate interests. And that speaks to exactly what you just said, Lisa, that that the usual players are going to try to continue to accumulate power. And yeah, Mark, I think you're right. I don't think we should be foolishly naive and just think, oh yeah, because of the pandemic has made these things obvious, everything's going to magically change and it will be rainbows and unicorns and
We've all learned to love
fairies.
each other in a hard time. These sorts
right.
of almost patriotic sort of sentiments.
Yeah.
That's bringing out the best in us. Well, it's bringing about everything in us.
Right. Yeah.
It's an intensification moment.
And I just want to give a shout out to Tamika. It's great that you're joining us. Tamika is from up in Northwest Minnesota and appreciates the consistently adequate parenting comment. Yeah, that was Tamika. That was from last Friday, and that was a lot of fun. So yeah, I think you'd enjoy that. Tamika has two wonderful young kids. But yeah, and to me, I mean, what I really love, Lisa, about hearing your perspective on this, and I think this is one of the things that can galvanize us to change, is that, those of us who are of the dominant culture persuasion in all kinds of ways, we have to humbly really listen to what folks from different communities have to say. Right. And, to hear you say, hey, look, folks, like we've been asking for online video access to all kinds of things for decades, and you've been saying no. And now suddenly when it hurts you, you make it happen. Like that's very humbling, right? I feel the desire to be in a posture of repentance when I hear something like that and be like, yeah, that's messed up. And I think that if we can do that, which is a very spiritual practice sort of activity, that is the kind of thing that opens the door to the possibility of change.
yeah, I just want to go do something radical. Like,
There you go.
I mean, repentance is radical, yes,
yes.
but like,
All right. That's
I've
great.
always wanted to go change myself to a bus or something. But yeah,
Nice.
There you
Our,
go.
yeah, in our next broadcast, we'll like have tips on where to get the best chains to chain yourself to things,
yeah.
and our favorite recipes for Molotov cocktails. Next episode.
I love that. That would be a great new version of like, where's Waldo? You know, like where are you chained to today?
Well, I'm kind of joking about that right now, but as you go back in disability history, there's a new book out by Judith Heumann, Heumann, on her first name Judith. She was one of the folks at the sit-in PADA at Health, Education, Welfare. But what makes me want to be chained to a bus was some guys called the Denver 12. They were the first chapter of what we know as ADAPT, and they shut down the bus system in Denver because they wanted to make it accessible. So it's always been one of my life goals to be chained to a bus. So
yeah.
maybe today.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And, you know, that's, so I think it was last Wednesday when we had Catherine on, and we were talking about the history of some of these radical activities that did not require mass mobilizations of the people. And so we were, you know, giving examples of different things. And I think that's another great example, right? I mean, what phenomenal, you know, political theater, right? An action to go out and chain yourself to a bus. And, you know, that I think those are the kinds of things that, right, we need to do, you know, and history have been moved forward by those kinds of activities. So well, we've got a comment here
from Dorinda Cassidy. I feel like I'm spying in on friends. You've received some loneliness in my quarried studio.
All right. Hi, Dorinda. Dorinda is another person who's been part of the Academy for Spiritual Formation. And yeah.
She also writes, thinking of Mead's quote about what it takes to change the world.
Okay. And which quote was that? Do we know that?
I don't know it, but hopefully maybe she'll post it.
Maybe she'll throw it up there.
And here's in the meantime, here's a comment from Zeres. Thank you for this episode. We need to also understand that being more vulnerable does not mean one is a part of marginalized. Many strengths and vulnerabilities are a part of the predatory class, get accommodations and are enabled. Others that are not aligned with predatory ruling class are disabled. Yes,
yeah, great comment. Thank you so much. Dorinda put something up. Did you get the quotes?
It doesn't look like a quote. It says a few people went, so it might be more to it.
She's working on it, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess throughout this, I also want to, even though I am marginalized because I have white skin or European skin, I have privilege. Because I'm educated, I have privilege. And because I've worked before, I have privilege. I just want to listen more and be present more and just be one of the folks that facilitates getting other people to the table.
Mhm.
Being aware of my privilege.
Well, I think that's a great comment to end on. That's very wise. So, Lisa, thank you. Thank you for enduring technological challenges with the
Yeah.
computer to get on here. We really, really appreciate you coming on. And so the way this works when we end this is that we have a sort of awkward moment where we all have to put on our best faces while the live stream is ending.
Slowly ends. Yeah. It was good to meet you, Lisa.
You too. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.